changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your Chicken Soup for the Soul. So have you ever surprised yourself by doing something because you're on a mission and then later you just can't believe that you pulled that off? Sometimes we just fly right over the edge of our comfort zones because we're so focused on what we're trying to accomplish. It's cool when that happens because I feel like it permanently changes you. You never go back all the way to how you were before. You now know that you can do things that you didn't think were possible before. And today I have two stories about this. One by a woman who did something brave that only took minutes, and another by a woman who did something brave for many years. So we're going to start with the short one. And this is a story by Andrea Fisher, who pulled off a coup for her son, driven by that mother's love that is so famous for getting things accomplished. Andrea was at a very crowded skate park event where Tony Hawk, the world's probably most famous and beloved skateboarder, was making an appearance. The crowd was going crazy. Hundreds of young people, mostly boys. And Andrea was there on a mission. She had bought a skateboard for her son at the start of the event, and she was determined to get it signed by Tony Hawk. She had to be strategic as she moved through the large crowd with the cumbersome skateboard. She could see where Tony was walking, and she had to plot her own path so that she intersected with him just right. She says, I had to reach Tony for my little boy, my little skateboarder, one of Tony's most adoring fans. I pushed through masses of people. There was no stopping me. It was a tight squeeze with the crowd screaming for his attention. Finally, utterly determined, I pushed right through with an inner resolve that seemed to come from a power greater than myself. And as I approached this giant of a man, the ever so tall Tony Hawk, I screamed as loudly as my lungs would permit, "Tony, for my son!" Tony Hawk turned toward her and made eye contact. She saw what a kind man he was. He scribbled his signature on her board, and then he turned around and continued his exit through the crowd. Andrea says, I am usually intimidated by large crowds, but on that day, I became a warrior. I had transformed into Wonder Woman, imagining I was pushing my way through thousands of people to save the planet. I wasn't just a typical homeschooling mom, I was a conqueror. Getting that signature for my son was a feat like no other. Victorious, she went back to her son and husband, brandishing the signed skateboard. She was thrilled that she had risen to the occasion. She says it was the happiest day of her life, and she walked back to their car with happy tears streaming down her face. All right, now here comes our long story. Cassandra Brandt has another story about being a mother on a mission, and this was the one that took years. She was a young, single mom who had lost custody of her daughter after some trouble with the law, and she wanted to get her daughter back. Cassandra was working at a hotel for not much more than minimum wage when this crew of steelworkers checked in. And every day she would talk to them when they came back from work, and that was when she learned how much money she could make if she too walked the iron. This crew was building a Walmart, and when it was done, they'd be on to the next job at Target in Los Angeles. The foreman hired Cassandra as a driver and laborer. When she saw those guys walking up in the sky on those steel beams, she couldn't believe she would ever do that. And none of the guys believed it either. She had a lot to prove. But she did it. Within months, she was driving the Reach forklift. A year later, she was a certified welder. She says, the guys all accepted me when they saw how hard I worked and how eagerly I learned. She pulled it off. She traveled and lived in hotels and did a little tourism between work shifts, and she saved a lot of money. A year and a half later, she was awarded full custody of her daughter, and she brought her out on the road with her, putting her in daycare in each city where they worked. Her foremen were lenient with her and they let her have weekends off so she could spend them doing fun things with her daughter. She was actually beginning to wonder how she had ever tolerated a desk job. Her regular crew knew her, but she says, on every new job site, I endured the stares of other tradesmen who were surprised to see a young blonde woman in a pink hard hat on their job site. I wasn't fazed by their scrutiny. I was a show-off. I pushed myself to be bold and work hard, and I earned a place in a trade dominated by men, and I could walk the iron. Her first time standing up there on a beam with another one swinging toward her for her to fasten in place is seared in her memory. She says, there was nothing above me but blue sky. Down below, the hard hats on the crew looked as small as my thumb. The beam stretched out in front of me for 20 long feet. My heart was in my stomach. I froze. But she did it. The crew was waiting for her, so she did it. Her hands were shaking, but she did it. For her daughter, and for herself, and for 3 times her old salary. Cassandra fastened that first beam in place, and then she moved towards the second beam. This time her hands weren't shaking. She says, as I tightened the last bolt, I felt a grin spread across my face. I was still afraid, but I was also excited and proud. I was a tradeswoman, an iron worker. It was so far out of my comfort zone, but I was doing it and it was changing my life. I'd made a career for myself. I was a responsible adult and had gotten my daughter back. Cassandra walked the iron for years, and along the way, she got a college degree too. And then finally, she gave it up and she became the writer she had always wanted to be. She says, the confidence and independence I cultivated as an iron worker made me the woman I am today. I'm Amy Newmark. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about our new books, join the more than 2 million people who follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or X. You can also go to our website, chickensoup.com. You can also see this new book, Just Say Yes, on our website. And if you want to get your own copy, you will find it at lots of different big box stores, along with our other bookstores like Walmart, Kroger, Meijer, Fred Meyer, BJ's, other big box stores, plus your local Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, and of course on Amazon. And please come back for our next episode to hear one of my most popular stories on Medium about how I knew my mother was having a stroke and how you can recognize when someone is having one.